flying a plane is what they call a hard skill. Basically, you know it or you don't. You can learn it, you can teach it to somebody, and then you can just do it over and over again. Teaching people to fly a plane, not so much. You need to know people. It's a much softer skill. It's much more complicated and much more nuanced. You have to know how people are motivated, why people act the way they do, and how communication happens. So this FOI is basically that Psychology 101 course that you need in order to work with people, in order to know what's going on inside their head and how to communicate with people. So the first topic is human behavior. First of all, what is human behavior? Well, there are many definitions, but the basic definition which the FAA gives is the result of attempts to satisfy certain needs. So in order to understand human behavior, we need to understand these human needs. And one of the ways of doing that is understanding what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the basic premise is that there are basic needs which need to be met before more advanced needs can be taken care of. And there's a certain hierarchy of basic to more advanced needs. So the most basic need, according to this structure, is the biological needs. The need for food, water, basic needs of a human being. If you're hungry, if you don't have those basic comfort level biological needs met, then you're not going to be able to focus on any other needs, school, flight school, whatever it may be. The second of Maslow's needs is security, feeling of like you're being safe. If you feel like you're in danger all the time, then that's going to be your focus, and you won't be able to focus on higher level needs. The next one after that is a feeling of belonging. After people have their biological needs met and their needs of security met, then they need to feel like they belong. They need to feel some connection with other humans. After that comes esteem, and this counts for both self-esteem and esteem from others. You need to feel like you're worth something. You need to feel like others respect you, and you need to have a certain amount of self-respect for yourself. Once you've had that need met, then you can move on to the next need, which would be cognitive and aesthetic needs. Cognitive needs are the needs to know something, the need to understand, and aesthetic needs are just the need for beauty. Now, of course, there are situations where aesthetic needs, the need for beauty, and some people and in some situations can sort of undercut all the other needs and become the most basic drive that a human has. But Maslow said that the needs are not rigidly structured, and there can be some flux in this hierarchy. And the final need that Maslow set forth was the need for self-actualization, and that is to just become who you're meant to become, to fulfill your mission. And for many people, for many pilots or student pilots, that's where piloting comes in. That's where flight school comes in. It's being who you're meant to be. It's fulfilling your dreams. So the point is, your student won't be able to fulfill that most advanced need of self-actualization until the more basic needs, like for food and sleep and a feeling of community, are met. In order to understand human needs, you also need to understand motivation. Now, what is motivation? Motivation is just basically why we do what we do, what drives us. The FAA's definition is the reason one acts or behaves in a certain way. And in order to be an effective flight instructor, you need to know how motivations work. Now, another aspect of human behavior is defense mechanisms. The flight instructing environment is a very high-stress environment. It can lead to a lot of anxiety and even feelings of danger or feelings of threat. And as a flight instructor, you need to know how people generally react, or some of the different ways that people might react to feelings of stress. And one of the sort of systems of understanding that is a list of defense mechanisms. One is denial. Denial is when you just say that something didn't happen. People do this all the time in flight instructing. They'll say, "Oh no, I made that radio call. It was ATC that messed up," or "No, I didn't forget that," or always living in denial of what really happened, because what really happened is threatening or uncomfortable. Another defense mechanism is repression, and that's when you basically repress, suppress, put to the back of your mind what you don't want to confront, what you don't want to understand, what you don't want to accept. Another defense mechanism is what's called displacement. That's where you take a natural emotional reaction to something and you displace it or shift it to an area of your life where it doesn't belong. So you might feel feelings of anger against your boss and frustration against maybe the incompetence of your boss or something, and you would take that anger out on somewhere where it doesn't belong, like your husband or wife. The next one is rationalization. This is something that everybody does all the time. It's basically when you do something wrong, coming up with reasons why you were in the right or reasons why it was okay. Reasoning yourself as a way of defending yourself. Even when you are in the wrong and you know sort of in the back of your mind that you're wrong, you're still coming up with excuses. Well, I'm an inexperienced pilot. It was a bad situation. Well, I was drunk, things like that. Another one is fantasy. Some people retreat into a fantasy world and they just think in their minds about their dreams because the real world of challenges and difficulties is a little bit too much to take. Another defense mechanism is what's called compensation. That's when you make up for your weaknesses by emphasizing your strengths. Let's say a student is really strong on the book side of learning and really strong in the sort of academic side of flight instructing, the academic side of being a pilot, but not so good at the stick and rudder skills. A student like that might try to compensate, might try to always talk about how good of a score he got on the written test, or always sort of bring up the regs as a way of showing off. And he might do this as a way of making up for the lack of actual piloting ability that he has. The next one is projection. That's when you take a belief that you have and you project it onto someone else. You sort of assume that other people have that as well. Like you have weaknesses with the regs, and so you assume that everybody else has that weakness. That's you projecting yourself onto other people. And then the last one is reaction formation. This one's a little bit harder for me to understand, but it's basically, I think, when you fake a belief opposite of your true belief, because your true belief causes you too much anxiety or it causes too much of a feeling of threat. So an example might be something like you're actually really afraid of being in the plane. You're afraid of being up so high, and so you fake this sort of nonchalance and you fake this sort of bravado whenever you're in a plane. That's a reaction against the way you actually feel. It's a faked belief. Reaction formation. And the final concept in human behavior is just emotional reactions. As a flight instructor, you need to know how your student is going to tend to react to this stressful environment of flight. And there are some normal reactions to stress. A normal reaction to stress might be just something like a heightened awareness and a little bit of a quicker reaction to things. That's if you're lucky. That's a really sort of healthy reaction to a stress. But there are lots of unhealthy reactions too, and the list that the FAA gives is this: number one, a painstaking self-control, having more control over yourself and your emotions and your actions than is normal or healthy or ordinary. Another is a rapid change in emotion. Going from depressed to euphoric with little explanation. Another is extreme over-cooperation. You would hope as an instructor that your student would cooperate with you and follow your advice, but a student who's excessively stressed out might be too, again, painstaking in that process and try to cooperate a little bit too much, a little bit more than is normal. Another reaction to stress might be severe anger towards the instructor, and this would be a sort of a more normal, unhealthy reaction to stress, just blowing up at the instructor and yelling and getting more angry than the situation deserves. Another one could be inappropriate laughter or inappropriate singing at various points, or finally, marked changes in mood from lesson to lesson. And this ties in closely with the emotional changes that we talked about before. Now that we have the basics of human behavior understood, the next topic would be communication. And it's important to understand that there are three aspects of communication, three basic elements that happen during all communication. That's one, the source of communication, which in flight instruction would usually just be the instructor. Two, the symbols, and three, the receiver. So the symbols would just be the spoken word, and the receiver would be the student, the flight student. And whenever you talk about communication, it's important that you understand at least that there are those three elements, and there can be a breakdown in communication that could be attributable to either one of those three. And now, it's important as a flight instructor to know certain barriers to effective communication. You want to be an effective communicator, but you might not be if one of these is in the way. The first barrier might be called the confusion between the symbol and the symbolized object. So the symbol is usually words, and the symbolized object is just what you mean by the words. So here's an example of that. I tell people all the time that I'm a pilot, and so they say immediately, "Oh, who do you fly for?" Well, I'm not that kind of pilot. When I say pilot, I mean a more technical term. I have a pilot certificate, and when they hear pilot, they think airline pilot with a cap and a white shirt, flying in the cockpit of a 747. That's a little bit of a breakdown in communication there. Another barrier of effective communication would be an overuse of abstractions, and teachers generally can be guilty of this all the time. It's using words that are too abstract and not concrete enough. So it would be easy to fall into this trap when you're talking about something like aerodynamics. Aerodynamics can get very abstract when you're talking about the air molecules and high pressure and low pressure, and planes, and generally speaking, and how the airfoil works. And something more concrete would be the experience of aerodynamics, how we experience aerodynamics as a pilot of a Cessna flying in Sedona. Another breakdown in communication might be something just called interference, and this is really just whenever anything gets in the way at all. So language could be an element of interference. If you're instructing students whose native language is not English, that could be a very basic, obvious breakdown in communication there. And the final breakdown in communication would just be a lack of common experience between the student and the instructor. It might be hard, for example, for a 60-year-old man trained in traditional teaching techniques to go into an inner-city school today and instruct the kids there, because they just have such a different life experience than he does, and a different way of expressing themselves and a different way of communicating. He would need to sort of become acquainted with that, or they would need to become more acquainted with his life experiences before meaningful communication happens easily. Finally, we need to talk about developing communication skills. As an instructor, you should always be developing your communication skills. Instructing is a process of communicating. And there are several ways that you can do this. One is by just listening, being a better listener. Being a good listener is part of being a good communicator. Same thing with asking questions, being a good questioner. So listening, questioning. Then what the FAA handbook calls instructional communication and instructional enhancement. Instructional communication is how you get ideas across to teach them, how you get ideas across as an instructor. That's different from the ordinary sort of communication that you might have with a sibling or a spouse. And instructional enhancement is always making your instructing more effective and more understandable, more relatable, with things like stories, instructional aids, anecdotes, and things like that. And the final way of increasing your communication skills is by role play. This can come in handy a lot as you're an instructor. You might take on the role, say, of an angry passenger, or maybe of an impatient employer, and using those roles with your student will help your student to understand some of the different roles he's going to be in as a pilot, and will help you also to increase your ability to communicate with him in various ways. So that's basically the FAA's Psychology 101 course for instructors. This is the basic things about human behavior, about how humans behave, and how they are motivated, and how to communicate with people that the FAA wants you to know as a groundwork for all of your future work as an instructor and for all of your future understanding of the subsequent FOIs.